All right, welcome to another Linkfitties Deep Dive. This time we're going to be looking at personalizing AI image generation. We've all played around with those AI tools that create pictures from text prompts. But what if you want the AA to generate an image of your dog? Not just any dog or your cat or something else really specific to you. Please like us and subscribe so that we can bring more content to you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. That kind of specificity is something that regular AI isn't all that great at capturing. Generating any old dog is one thing, but getting all the little details of your dog, that's a whole different story.
Right. And that's where this research paper comes in. It's called DreamBooth, Fine-Tuning Text-to-Image Diffusion Models for Subject-Driven Generation. And they actually found a way to teach AI to both recognize and reproduce a unique subject that you give it.
The method they're proposing for this personalization, it's pretty clever actually. They're basically expanding the AI's vocabulary so that it can link specific unique identifiers with the subject that you give it.
Okay, so how does that actually work? Well, the paper starts out by explaining this core problem on page 1. They point out that these huge text-to-image models are amazing at generating images from descriptions, but they just can't capture and reproduce the specific look of a subject you give them.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Even if you were to type in an incredibly detailed description of your dog, like every single spot and marking, the AI would probably still make images of dogs that just look kind of similar, but not exactly right.
Right. And that's because the AI has been trained on millions of images of dogs, right? So it knows the general idea of a dog, but it doesn't know the nuances of your specific dog.
Right, okay, so page 2 of the paper introduces this concept of DreamBooth, which is their method for fine-tuning a text-to-image diffusion model so you can personalize it to a subject.
Yeah. And the goal, they say, is to get the model to learn a unique identifier that refers to that specific subject and only that subject. At first, they try to use common words like unique or special or something, but that just didn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, trying to teach your dog a new trick using a command it already knows. It's just going to get confused.
Right. Exactly. What they discovered was that they needed to use these rare tokens. Kind of like character combinations that the AI hasn't really encountered very much before. It's kind of like giving your subject a secret code name that only the AI understands.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes. So then on page 3, they get into the actual nuts and bolts of how this all works. And it all starts with this thing called few shot learning, where you only need to give the AI 3 to 5 images of your subject.
Yeah. And DreamBooth uses those images to fine-tune the model, essentially teaching it to associate that special rare token identifier with that subject.
Okay. But I'm thinking if you only train it on a few specific pictures of your dog, wouldn't that make the AI model too specialized? Wouldn't it start to forget about other kinds of dogs?
Right. That's a good question. That's where this thing they call prior preservation loss comes in. It basically encourages the model to still remember the broader category, like all the other dogs it knows about, even while it's learning about your specific dog. It's pretty clever, actually.
It's like telling the AI, hey, remember all those other dogs you learned about? They're still important, too.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now if we jump to page 4, they start getting into the details of how they actually implement this whole thing. So first of all, they had to choose a pre-trained text-to-image model to start with. They end up going with Imagen, which is Google's text-to-image model, and then they also talk about the specific training process they use, like the optimizer and the hyperparameters they chose, all that technical stuff.
Right, and then there's this whole section on how they actually generate the training prompts. They use a specific template that combines the class name, dog in this case, with that unique identifier, and then a bunch of modifiers, and those modifiers are things like different backgrounds, poses, or activities.
Yeah, all those different modifiers are really important, because they help teach the AI to generate images of your subject in all kinds of different situations, right? Not just the ones you gave it in those first few pictures. Okay? So then on page 5, they start talking about how they evaluated the model. So they created a brand new data set that was specifically designed for evaluating this kind of subject-driven generation. And this data set has images of 30 different subjects.
And they mentioned that those subjects include both objects and live subjects like, pets.
Right, and to evaluate the model, they use two key metrics, subject fidelity and prompt fidelity. So subject fidelity is basically a measure of how well the images that the AI generates actually match the original subject that you gave it. And then prompt fidelity measures how well those images actually match the text descriptions that you give the AI.
Okay, so to actually measure that subject fidelity, they use this metric called DO, which basically compares the features of the generated images with the features of the real images. Yeah.
And then for pro-fidelity, they use CLI score.
Right, and they spend some time actually explaining both of those metrics in detail, like how they chose them and why they're the right ones to use for this task. It's really thorough.
And then on page 6, they start talking about the actual results they got. So they compare DreamBooth to another personalization technique called textual inversion. And you can actually see some examples of that comparison in figure 2.
Right, and what's really cool is that DreamBooth, especially when you use as the base model, just blows textual inversion out of the water. Like it just performs so much better.
Yeah, if you look at that figure, you can really see it. Like DLLE2 and Imogen, when they don't use DreamBooth, they just can't seem to capture the unique features of this clock that they're using as an example. But with DreamBooth, the results are like way closer to the original.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about capturing the subject's appearance accurately. It's also about being able to, recontextualize the subject, put it into all kinds of different scenes based on those text prompts that you give it.
Right. And then on page 7, they go into a lot more detail with the quantitative results. Yeah.
So table 1 shows the actual Dino and Seal scores for all the different models and techniques they tried.
And it's really impressive. DreamBooth, especially the one with Imogen, consistently gets higher scores for both subject fidelity, A and D prompt fidelity. So that basically means it can create images that are not only more accurate to the subject, but also better at following those text description that you give it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty clear winner. And then they even did a user study to compare DreamBooth and textual inversion, and those results are in table 2. And basically people just overwhelmingly prefer DreamBooth for both subject fidelity and prompt fidelity.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that DreamBooth is kind of a game changer when it comes to this personalized image generation. But of course, there are still some limitations. They talk about those on page 8. Like sometimes the model can overfit to the training data, or can be sensitive to unusual content. Texts or the context itself can actually influence the subject's appearance in weird ways.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like in figure 9, they show some examples of these failure cases. Like sometimes if you put a subject on a brightly colored background, it can actually change the subject's color a little bit.
And then sometimes it just really struggles to generate images and context that are super unusual or unexpected.
Right. It's good that they're upfront about those limitations, though. So then they kind of wrap up the main of the paper on page 9 by talking about the broader impacts and potential applications of DreamBooth, and they also emphasize that there are some ethical considerations that come with using this kind of technology. Right?
Yeah. They touch on the fact that it could potentially be misused, and they talk about the importance of making sure that AI is developed responsibly.
Right, and then they acknowledge that there's definitely more research that needs to be done to address those limitations and also to explore all the new possibilities for personalized AI. And then finally on page 10, and they have all their citations.
Okay, so that's the main paper. So where do we go from here?
Well, the real juicy stuff is actually in the supplementary material. That's where they really dive deep into all the technical details and give us a bunch of extra results and analysis.
Okay, sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack. Should we jump into that supplementary material now?
Absolutely, let's do it. All right, so picking up where we left off, let's dive into this supplementary material. Starting on page 1, they give us a much more detailed explanation of those rare token identifiers and why they're so important. Remember how they tried using common English words like unique at first to identify the subject, but they ran into some problems.
Yeah, I was like, those words already had too much, baggage, I guess, for the AI, like they were already too loaded with meaning.
Right, exactly. They basically found that the AI already had all these pre-existing associations with those common words, so it just couldn't really learn a new specific association for the subject.
So using rare tokens, it was kind of like creating a clean slate for the AI, right?
Exactly, because they're using these character combinations that the AI has never seen before. They could create unique identifiers that are truly specific to that subject. It's pretty clever.
It's interesting how they had to kind of like work around the AI's existing knowledge to make this personalization thing work.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on to page 2, they go into more detail about the prior preservation loss and how it helps to prevent this thing called language drift, right? That's what kept the AI from forgetting about other types of dogs if you only trained it on like your corgi, right?
Right. Exactly. So, what they explain here is that the prior preservation loss basically encourages the model to create images that are not only like faithful to the subject that you gave it, but also like diverse and representative of that general class of things.
Okay, so it's not just about memorizing the specific subject, it's also about making sure the AI still remembers how to generalize to other similar things.
Exactly. And they actually have some really cool visual examples of this on figure 6. They show how the model, when it's trained with that prior preservation loss, can generate a much wider range of poses and appearances for the subject, even when you've only trained it on a really limited set of images.
Oh, that's cool. So you can really see that the AI is still tapping into its knowledge of the broader category, even while it's learning about this very specific subject.
Right. Okay. So let's jump to page 3. They talk about the importance of actually using the correct class name during training. Like, they emphasize that telling the AI what kind of thing the subject is, like dog, for example, really helps it to understand the context and to kind of like integrate this new subject into its existing knowledge.
It's like giving the AI a helpful label, right? You're telling it, hey, this new thing you're seeing, it's actually a type of this.
Exactly. And they actually show in table 4 how using the wrong class name or even no class name at all can really mess up the results.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, AI is probably going to do a better job if it knows what it's dealing with, right?
Okay. So now on page 4, they get into the effects of the number of training images on the model's performance. And this is super interesting because it kind of challenges this assumption that, more data is always better.
Yeah, I remember them mentioning that in the main paper, like there's kind of a sweet spot when it comes to how many images you use to train the model.
Right. And here in the supplementary material, they give us a lot more detailed results to back that up. So in tables 5 and 6, they show how the model's performance on both subject fidelity and prompt fidelity changes depending on how many training images you use.
Yeah, it's cool to see how the performance kind of peaks around 4 images for most of the subjects they tested.
And if you use fewer than that, it can lead to lower fidelity, especially for subjects that are really complex or rare.
Right? But what's really surprising is that using more than 4 images doesn't really seem to help that much. And in some cases, it can actually make the performance a little bit worse. So it's like there's this point of diminishing returns when it comes to training data. Right?
Exactly. And they think that this might be because of overfitting, which is where the model gets so focused on those specific training examples that it loses some of its ability to generalize to new things.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about throwing more data at the problem, it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly. And it's also worth pointing out that this optimal number of training images might change depending on how complex or how where the subject is.
So if it's something really unique or unusual, you might need to use more images to get good results.
Right? Okay. So let's move on to page 5. Here they shift gears a little bit and start talking about the super resolution models that are used in imaging. You know, those are the models that are responsible for upscaling those lower resolution images that the diffusion model generates and adding in all those really fine-grained details.
Yeah, it's like they're adding that final polish that makes the images look so realistic.
Exactly. And they actually found that tuning these super resolution models is super important for getting the best possible results with DreamBooth. And they can this visual comparison in figure 21 to show the difference between not tuning the super resolution model at all. Tuning it with like the standard amount of noise augmentation. And then tuning it with a reduced level of noise augmentation.
Wow, the results are pretty amazing. The ones that were generated with those fine-tuned super-resolution models, they just look so much sharper and more realistic, especially that one with the reduced noise augmentation. It really shows how important those tiny details are for making images that look believable.
Yeah, definitely. And then on page 6, they explain exactly how they tuned those super-resolution models. They experimented with different levels of noise augmentation during the tuning process. And they found that reducing the noise level actually helped to preserve those fine-grained details better, especially for the subject.
So they're basically tweaking the training process to make sure that the AI doesn't accidentally smooth over those important details that make the subject unique.
Right. All right. So now starting on page 7, this is where things get really exciting. They start showcasing a ton of additional applications and examples of what you can do with the DreamBooth. This is where we can really see the creative potential of this whole thing.
All right, I've been waiting for this. Give me some examples of what they can do with it.
Okay, well, first of all, they show us a bunch more examples of recontextualization, which is where they take a subject and put it into all kinds of different scenes. And they also show us these amazing art renditions where they generate artistic interpretations of a subject like in the style of a famous painter or an art movement.
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing. So like you could have a portrait of your cat painted in the style of Van Gogh.
Yeah, exactly. And then they also show us this thing called expression manipulation, where they can actually generate images of subjects with different emotions and expressions. And they even show how DreamBooth can be used for novel view synthesis, which is basically generating images of a subject from angles that weren't even in those original training images you gave it.
Oh, wow, that's cool. So like you create a 360 view of your dog even if you only took pictures from one side.
Exactly. And it just keeps going. They also show how you can use DreamBooth for accessorization, like realistically adding objects to the subject in an image.
Oh, you can like put a hat on your dog or like sunglasses on your cat.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the coolest things they show is this whole comic strip with this like persistent character. And it's all generated with DreamBooth.
A whole comic strip, that's wild.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And throughout all these examples, they show us comparisons with like Delay 2 and Imogen. And you can really see how DreamBooth's personalized approach just gets so much better results. Like the images are way more faithful to the subject, and they're much better at following those text descriptions you give it.
It really feels like DreamBooth is kind of pushing the limits of what's possible with this personalized image generation stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But then on page 14, they kind of step back and talk about the bigger implications of this technology, and they acknowledge that, there's potential for misuse here. They really emphasize how important it is to think about the ethical side of things and to make sure that we're developing AI responsibly.
Right. It's important to remember that there are potential downsides to this technology too, not just all these amazing creative possibilities.
Exactly. Like they point out that this kind of technology could be used to create super realistic deep fakes or to manipulate images in ways that could be really harmful.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we need to be really careful about how we develop and use these AI tools because they're so powerful.
Absolutely. Okay. So then on page 15, they jump into a section on additional experiments. And this is where they get really deep into some of the more technical aspects of DreamBooth. They do a bunch more analysis on the impact of that prior preservation loss, like how it affects the model's ability to create a diversity of images. And they also look at how the number of input images you use affects both subject fidelity and prompt fidelity.
It sounds like they're really trying to understand all the little nuances of how this thing works.
Yeah, they are. And they also give us a lot more detail about their specific implementation, like the exact vocabulary encoding and tokenizer they used, and even the architecture of those super resolution models.
It's great that they're sharing all of this information. It's going to be super valuable for other researchers who want to build on their work.
Absolutely. And then finally on page 18, they wrap up the supplementary material with a discussion of future work and potential directions for research. They point out that we need to do more research to understand those limitations of DreamBooth better, especially in really challenging contexts, or when you're working with subjects that are super rare or unusual.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they also talk about how we could potentially extend DreamBooth to other domains like video generation or even 3D modeling.
Yeah, it seems like the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Okay, so after going through all this supplementary material, what are your biggest takeaways?
Well, I'm really impressed by how thorough their analysis is. They clearly put a ton of work into not only developing this new technique, but also really understanding its limitations and its potential impact.
And they've been super transparent about their methods and their findings, which is so important for the whole research community.
Definitely. I think it's safe to say that they've really laid a strong foundation for future work in this whole area of personalized AI image generation. I can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I think DreamBooth is a huge step forward for the field. It has the potential to totally change how we create images and how we interact with them.
I agree. And it's not just about those technical advancements. It's also about the creative possibilities that this technology opens up, like the ability to personalize AI image generation in this way. Has huge implications for self-expression and storytelling and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, it's pretty inspiring to think about all the ways that people could use this.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up this whole deep dive, I think it's worth taking a minute to think about the broader implications of personalized AI in general.
Yeah, good idea. Let's do that in the final part of this deep dive. We'll explore what this all means in the big picture and where we might be headed in the future. Join us for part 3. Welcome back. So we spent the last couple parts of this deep dive really getting into nitty-gritty of DreamBooth, all the technical details and how it works. But now I think it's time to zoom out a little bit and think about the big picture.
Yeah, definitely. I think what DreamBooth really highlights is this larger trend in AI where we're moving away from these general-purpose tools and towards a world where AI is more personalized. More tailored to our individual needs and preferences.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's I don't know. It's the difference between having a one-size-fits-all T-shirt and having a custom-made suit, right? The T-shirt is fine. It's convenient and all, but the suit, it just fits you perfectly.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And what DreamBooth shows us is that you can actually tune these AI models to achieve a pretty amazing level of personalization, even with just a small amount of data.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, which makes me wonder, like, where else could we apply this kind of approach?
Oh man, the possibilities are huge. Imagine having personalized language models that can capture your unique writing style or recommendation algorithms that really understand your super niche interests.
Okay, I like that. What else?
Well, we could have AI tutors that adapt to each student's learning style, or even virtual therapists that are trained on your specific emotional patterns.
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing. Like, what about personalized video games? Games where the characters in the story are shaped by your own preferences. I mean, it seems like the possibilities are just endless.
Yeah, it's super exciting. But of course, it also brings up some challenges as AI becomes more and more intertwined with our personal lives. We really need to start thinking about, responsible use, privacy, and data security.
Right? It's like we're opening this door to this whole new world, but we need to make sure we have the right, safeguards in place.
Exactly. We need to have clear guidelines and standards for personalized AI, and we need to make sure that there's transparency, accountability, and that users have control over their own data.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think DreamBooth is a really cool glimpse into a future where AI isn't just a tool, It's more like a creative partner that can adapt to our individual needs and empower us in ways that we can only begin to imagine right now.
Yeah, I love that. It's a future that's both super exciting and maybe a little bit daunting at the same time. But I think as long as we stay informed and keep asking the right questions and, approach this technology with a sense of responsibility, I think the possibilities are truly limitless. Thanks for joining us again at Linkfitty for this deep dive into DreamBooth. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives.